We've started recording again, and it's my pleasure to introduce Nochlachla Dube, who is an expert on refugees and how to deal with these unusual situations, such as those that have occurred as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. And today she's going to be talking to us about Homes for Ukraine scheme and her views on that, and what's gone well, what hasn't gone so well, and how we should be thinking about it in the future. So, Nochlachla, over to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for having me. And I've been following this first online. It's been great. I think the intersection between language and actually trying to do something in this space is actually very, very interesting. So I have struggled actually with trying to think about what I was going to talk about. And I think I can start by telling the story that my background, actually the first degree that I did was in applied mathematics. So I was taught how to talk in facts, right? So give people the facts and they should be able to make sense of them and do the right things. Then my first job after I graduated was with Doctors Without Borders. And I did a lot of analysis, especially for the medical doctors around expiry of medicines and stuff. And I noticed that they never responded to the facts that I was giving them about how much waste was going on. So I had to change tactic, and I learned to speak in a language that would appeal to their emotions. So I would say, if you do not donate these drugs today, there's a good chance that you're going to have to dump them. But then when you dump them, there are probably 5,000 people who would have been a bit more comfortable if you had actually given them those drugs today. Or maybe X lives that could have been saved if you had actually given those drugs today. Then I started getting their attention, and I was able to get a lot done. But then I decided to become an academic. And then I found out that they don't care about the emotional side of things. So I needed to appeal to their intellect. So whatever argument that had emotional connotations was not interesting for them. They're like, yeah, but we want to know what's interesting. And then I struggled with that when I started doing the engagement work. So like the article that I wrote, the basis of which you made contact with me, which was looking at the Homes for Ukraine scheme and what has gone wrong with that and what could be done a bit differently. So I don't want to repeat that article, and I was not smart enough to provide a link or something, but it is published in the Conversation sometime in October. You can see it there. But what I would like to do during this talk, I suppose, given the audience that is here, is to talk about the things that we could do if we should decide to become hosts that will make us better hosts, and why those things are important. And I think they are especially important because there's a lot of emotions involved. And usually they are emotions of the type that they are very difficult to put to words. And it's very hard to talk about those things. But somehow, if you make a decision to host someone in your home, then there are some realities you need to be aware of, and that you would need to sort of use as a way of managing the relationship so that it's considered successful at the end of the day. So the first thing that I have had to say to people is to be mindful, again, maybe going back to language, that we talk about hosts and guests in the context of hosting Ukrainian refugees. But the reality is that these are people who are not coming on vacation in the United Kingdom. These are people who have just essentially lost everything. And probably for the first time when they arrive in your home, they get the opportunity to actually process what has happened. Because until that point, they are just in survival mode. They're doing whatever it takes to just keep going. And maybe if you've had some online interaction with them, you might be surprised by the person who shows up at your door. They might seem a bit different, but it's just because then for the first time, they can actually start to process what has happened. So normally, at least from the few people that I've spoken with, so I don't have any real research on this, so sorry to the academics, but from what I have heard, it's that people sometimes have this romanticized view of what being a host means. You bring someone in your home, you show them some nice things, At the end of the day, you go on with your life, but that's not that. So you have to realize first and foremost that these are people who are going through a lot emotionally, mentally, sometimes even physiologically. And that means that how you are going to relate to them might be different from when someone is coming for holiday and staying in your home. That is the first thing. And then the second thing, which also showed up in the research that I was doing for this article that I wrote for the conversation, is that a lot of the people who did the hosting was a bit surprising, was that it was a surprise to the guests when they were told at the end of the 6 months that they had to leave. So usually, if you're going to host, one of the serious questions that you will have to ask yourself is, how long am I willing to do this for? If you're just going to try it for those 6 months, then what it means is that the moment someone arrives through your door, first of all, they should know this because it manages expectations, but you might also want to help them to already start looking for a place, because it's not that easy to find alternatives. And unfortunately, at least if we think about what the government is supposed to do, because I think there's no disagreement that it's the government's responsibility to then secure the long-term accommodation of these people. Doesn't look like there's a solid plan in place. So it means that a lot of people have to sort of find other ways other than the formal structures that will typically exist for assisting refugees in this regard. And then when you are living with people that are from a different culture, I like to also say that, you know, there are things that we consider normal, but maybe it's because they are the norm, right? So in our culture, well, I don't know what my culture is anymore. I've been all over the place. But let's talk about, you know, in typical British homes, you know, there will be routines around bedtime. When does the child go to bed and things like that. I'm actually raised in a culture where the kid literally passes out. Wherever they pass out, they'll pick them up and put them in bed. So there are no real strict boundaries around that. And I think what I've learned over time as a result of existing in multiple cultures is that it's not about whether something is normal or not. It's about whether it's typical or not. And I think just understanding this distinction makes a huge difference. So what is typical for us to do is this. But what's typical for other people is that there's nothing normal or abnormal about it. It just is. And because it's cultural, we usually don't have good explanations for it. So just understanding that distinction can also help with being a bit more open, I guess, and a bit more tolerant to the behavior that deviates from what we're used to. And actually, we have then the right to be a bit more curious. We can ask questions. How come you're staying up this late? I mean, isn't it good for the child to be in bed? You can start to understand and engage. And then another point that I will make, I'll tell you two more, and then I think I will stop. Another thing, which is a temptation that I have seen happen a lot in the humanitarian sector, and I think in some ways it also happens here, that sometimes our empathy or sympathy for a person who has been affected by conflict becomes so big that we actually disempower them, that we take away their capability to survive, to take initiative, to do certain things for themselves. So what we need to understand, especially if you will decide to host, is that part of your responsibility is to help somebody, sometimes even going through self-pity to the point that it paralyzes them. So it's not caring for them to help them to become more and more paralyzed over time. You actually want to set up a system that allows them to get back on their feet, to take charge of the things that they should be taking charge of. I think one speaker spoke, no, it wasn't a speaker, it was somebody that I spoke to earlier, who said somebody decided to host and now they're finding out what used to be their free days that they took from work is actually going to helping the family that they're hosting with finding schools, with doing all kinds of things. And yes, maybe in the beginning you have to do it, but part of your responsibility is to help people to be confident enough that they can do it themselves at a certain point. So you have to understand where your responsibilities lie and how sometimes being too helpful is actually bad for both of you, because you are going to burn out. This is not what you signed for, and it can cause a relationship to sour very quickly. And then finally, and I think this is also important, is it's to know that it's okay if things don't work out. So some people hesitate to even begin because they worry, like, what if it doesn't go well? What if it doesn't, we're a bad match? But I think anyone who is old enough and experienced enough will agree. Sometimes two people can be good people, but they're just not good for each other. And it's the same with the hosting relationship, you know, it doesn't make you a bad person if the relationship is not working, and the other way around. So what is more important in those situations, just like any relationship between two good people ending, you want to do it in a responsible way. So that means that at least keeping communication lines open and being able to say to each other, you know what, this isn't working. Okay, so what do we do? How much longer can I stay? What can we do in the meantime to make this arrangement work while we try to find solutions? Might be all that you have to do. So do not try this out of fear that it will fail. It might, just like any other relationship that has failed before. It's just what matters is what you will do when that happens, in order to make sure that it's done in a responsible way. So I think I will stop here. And if there are any questions, I will take them.
Well, thank you very much, Lancaster, for your presentation and for bringing attention to these issues that are not given a lot of attention in the mainstream, media. Are there any questions? Derek, yes.
So we've heard a lot today already about how language and learning languages, learning about cultures can open up communication and understanding. So is there any sense from the knowledge you have of host families, if the hosts are more willing to learn Ukrainian and learn about Ukrainian culture, is that does that benefit the relationship and the kind of hosting arrangement, or is it irrelevant to it?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think some people have already spoken about this, but I think learning the language is actually it opens the door to actually understanding the other people a bit better. And you mentioned, for example, in your presentation, right, like in Ukrainian, how they name different organs of the digestive system or something like that. But we also have specific words that we use for certain things. Sometimes that can be more powerful, and they're very difficult to describe. Like when I lived in the Netherlands, I picked up the word gezellig, right? And we normally say it's cozy, but it's not really cozy. It's a bit more than that. And so sometimes learning those things already actually gives you access to a particular culture. In my language, if someone comes through the door, they look a bit down, and you ask them, is everything all right? If they say ziabuya, it means they are coming, right? That's the literal translation, but it's so pregnant with meaning that it actually also even sets the code for how you behave when somebody says that. If somebody says ziabuya, you step back, you let them gather themselves. If they will not re-emerge from their room for the rest of the night, it's fine, because things are coming down, and that means that they need their space. So I think if you learn another language, it makes the language graduate from being more than a functional tool. It also can become a way of connecting, especially with the emotions that are very, very difficult to even talk about in our own languages, right? But we find within our own languages ways of sending signals that, this is what I need from you now, and maybe this is not the time to talk, those types of things.
Are there any more questions? Yes. Well, I have a question about one of the points you raised, saying that about cultural differences between British people and Ukrainian people, and you mentioned that sometimes Ukrainian children may not have the same fixed bedtimes that
children where I come from.
Where you come from?
Yeah,
sorry, where you come from? Yes. One thing I've also noticed is that British room temperature, to give you an example, is actually much lower than in many other countries, especially the countries with, I'll put it this way, the former communist countries. So what might be normal in this country, which say 21, 22 degrees, is quite cold for people where cultures where you should walk out. Well, if you wear a shorts and a t-shirt, that should be enough.
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned that these differences may make people curious and help intercultural understanding. But a very general question: how do you think that the majority of people react in that way? They say, "Oh, this is interesting. I want to find out more." Or do they react more negatively and say, this is an irritation? What's your impression?
I think when we think about things in terms of normal versus abnormal, that's where the irritation comes about.
Right.
Because you're like, it's not normal that you have the room at 24 degrees.
Yeah.
It's hotter than the hottest summer day.
Yes.
And, but if you would understand that there will be certain differences that do exist across cultures that we don't necessarily have good explanations for.
Yes.
And sometimes when we think about it, we will like, okay, I'm from a country where daytime winter temperatures are probably around 18 degrees.
Yes.
That's a winter day for me.
Yeah.
So if I'm walking in a room and it's set at 18 degrees, I'm feeling a bit shivery.
Yes.
And if I would not know, walking into a place that for them, that is normal, right? I might just turn the temperature up.
Yeah.
And so it's if you think in terms of whether it's typical versus not typical, then that helps you to at least have conversations that are not combative, because you're not coming from a place of like, what's wrong with you?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yes. Very sure. Actually, on that point, I know Shelley, who was speaking earlier, I don't know if she's still here. I think she's left, but she has recorded some videos on her YouTube channel about typical differences between Ukrainians and British people. Yeah. So, for instance, British people have a different idea of what personal space is. And one thing I actually knew, I live like you, I've lived in lots of different countries. And then when I returned to the United Kingdom to work at Lancaster, I actually did notice how conscious the local people were of other people's personal space as well. And also another thing that surprised me was how often British people say sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. So I remember I had to give you an example, I had a Polish visitor, and she said to me, you British people, you're always saying sorry, but you never mean it.
Well,
but okay, that was looking at it from her perspective, of course, that in Polish it's not common to say sorry to the same extent that British people would say so. But yes, it's but the why I mentioned this, I think it's also worth checking out on her channel some of these typical differences, these differences in what is typical between the cultures. Okay, are there any more questions for Nochlacha? Okay, well, thank you very much for your contribution. And we will, last but not least, we have Sergey Chura from the Digital Harbour Foundation and the Ukraine Advancement Fund, and he will be telling us about how he supports Ukrainian students. So, Sergey, whenever you're ready, please start your presentation.
Thank you, Tim. But before I do, I would like to confess this is my first time using Microsoft Teams. I'm a Zoom person, and so I have not figured out the way to share my screen with the slides. Tim, I've sent you the slides. Could we have you put the slides on the screen and I will go over, or is it not quite doable?
That's fine. Let me just open your so your Ukraine. Let me just open the.
Absolutely, and I apologize for that. I mean, I've been sitting for the last 10 minutes trying to figure out how to do it, and I don't see the share the screen button. And
well, this is a very common occurrence at online conferences. So I'll try to share it now.
Yeah, we can wait for a minute. Yeah.
Okay, so can you all now? Oops, I'll just close the other presentation. Can you all now see Digital Harbour Foundation?
Yes, I can see it. I'm assuming everyone else can see. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it.
Yes. Okay. So you just tell me when you'd like me to go through
Absolutely,
the
sir.
slides. Okay.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak in front of this learned crowd, and I would like to like to reiterate our support to your cause, to the cause of learning Ukrainian, and finding out more about how languages and science can interact among themselves. Well, I represent Digital Harbor Foundation, which is a Baltimore-based nonprofit organization. I'm in DC myself. The Digital Harbor is in Baltimore, and Digital Harbor Foundation has well, I guess I would say a relatively long history, and things have picked up over the last few years. We help. We help various projects related to technology, to digital access, and to ensure that lower income families do have such access, and to also foster the racial equality. Now, the next slide, please, sir.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So just a moment.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, and one of the Digital Harbor does a lot of things, different projects, and the growth over the last couple of years, without exaggeration, has been exponential. And um, one of the ways Digital Harbor Foundation operates is through fiscal sponsorship of various projects. And one of such projects is Ukraine Math and Science Achievement Fund. And if you could go to the next slide, please, sir, I will. So basically, what is the fund? As you all know, Russian Federation have taken its aggression to the next level on February 24th, and now at that time full scale invaded Ukraine. And a lot of people were quite appalled by that. I'd say this, so the whole world was appalled by that, but a lot of people were trying to do something about that. And one of those people, there were a few Cambridge professors that were trying to STEM professors, computer science professors, that were trying to help Ukrainian STEM students in whatever way they could, sending them money, computers, and so forth. And at some point, they reached out to their U.S. connections to broaden the scope of this support, and they were able to connect to Mr. Ken Griffin, who is the founder and the founder and the owner of Citadel, and basically the two and two came together, and the plan matured, so to say. The fund was created in this summer, and Mr. Griffin has graciously donated a significant amount of money for the fund to operate, to help Ukrainian STEM students affected by the war. Currently, we support 7 students, and all of them are in Cambridge. 4 of them are studying Cambridge University. 3 of them are studying in a secondary school, and we're supporting them with room and board and so forth, in hopes of them going to either Cambridge or other prestigious U.S. or UK university. But that is just the start. Our plans are much broader than that, and we're currently helping over 40 Ukrainian students from the STEM field, from math, physics, computer science, chemistry, astronomy. We were helping them with passing the TOEFL test, and then taking the next step as far as applying to the U.S. universities. So there's a lot of things in the works. And in addition to, and there's 3 main categories where we provide assistance with, and that's the next slide, Tim. The first one is undergraduate scholarships. That's basically what I've kind of touched upon a few seconds ago. We finance all of our participants are called Griffin Scholars, and we currently have 4 in Cambridge. We support we basically pay all of their college bills. And the second prong of the program it's called flexible support for students. That's the other 3 students we're supporting who go to a secondary school, but not quite at a university level yet. We pay for students room and board, meals, food expense, so forth. And as I mentioned, we're expanding the program. We're going to offer much more help starting next year because the program will start only 3 months ago. So we're planning on helping many, many more STEM students with both the first and the second prong. The third prong is actually the smallest bucket of money, and it's called infrastructure gifts, and they're geared towards various institutions in Ukraine, helping whom would help the STEM students, so to say. And we're currently in talks with a couple of polytechnical institutes in Ukraine. Early stages, nothing solid yet, but the idea here is to help to improve English language skills of STEM students because there's a lot of bright minds in Ukraine, but quite often the level of English is not quite adequate for a stellar international career, and we want to help with that. So that's the infrastructure gifts, so to say, and that's basically the brief overview of. Personally, I guess 2 words about myself. I'm a Ukrainian American. I'm in DC right now. I came to the U.S. 30 years ago. Did my high school here. Did my college here. Did my law school here. Did my business school here, and worked as an attorney for a long time, worked in the financial field for one of the largest corporations. And for the last few years, I've been actually working out of Ukraine, and the war caught me in Ukraine. And so I had to flee Ukraine by car through Moldova. I had to stay with my family. I have 2 small kids and a wife. And so all of us had to stay at a refugee camp for a few days, then with a host family. Then anyways, it was a nightmare. So I truly do feel the pain of all of those Ukrainian refugees and people who are going through this. This is not just an empty sound to me. Tim, if we could go to the next slide, I will say a few words about some particularities of Ukrainian language. So as you may have noticed, I'm not a linguist by training. So I thought, how can I make this fun? And I thought, well, how about starting with the months of the year? And those of you who are Ukrainian by birth, you probably know what I'm about to say, but others may not, and it may be interesting. So January in Ukrainian is called Sicheń. And why is it called Sicheń? The word to sich is a verb. To sich is to cut or flagellate. So basically, the snow is blowing so hard that it flagellates you. It cuts you. The next one is February. In Ukrainian, it's lutý, and that just means severe cold. March is berezень. That's why bereza in Ukrainian is birch. But what about birch that is so interesting in as far as March goes? Well, I believe it's the birch blossom that appears. The next one is квітень. Квітка українською мовою є квітень April. Квітка це flower. And so that's the natural choice for the name for the month. Next one is travень, May. And I believe the name comes because the grass by May becomes so tall that that's basically the event related to nature that is noticeable, because naturally grass grows all year round in most places, but in May it finally ends up growing to some limit. Next one is June, czerwień. In Ukrainian, red is czerwone, and thus a lot of red fruits, and I put cherries there, but I believe strawberries would also work, and other red fruits. So basically, first fruits, i.e. red fruits, do appear. That's why it's czerwień. Next one is July, lipeń. Again, we have linden trees that are blossoming, and that's what gives this month its name. The August is Serpeng, and that comes after sickle. It's harvest time, and over many centuries, the peasants were harvesting wheat and other crops with sickles. So that's the month where sickle is indeed used the most. Next one is Veresing. And Veres in English is heather, so it's heather blossoms. The only interesting nuance I found about this one is that heather does not grow on most of Ukraine. It grows in western Ukraine a lot, and a little bit in central Ukraine, but not in other parts. So that's just a particular note about this one. October is Zhovting. Zhovty in Ukrainian is yellow, basically because all of the leaves turn yellow. November is listopad because that means listopade means leaves are falling. So that's the relationship to that month. And final one is December, which is Grudень, and Grudka clump. So snow is falling in clumps. And I think the interesting note here is, so it's not so cold for snow to be blowing like in other months. So it's still kind of a little wet. That's why it clumps. So like I said, this is kind of, in a way, useless stuff, but I thought it was interesting. If we could go to the next slide, I will say some more. All right, this one is kind of I guess, food for thought kind of notes. So we have days of the week. Понеділок, вівторок, середа, четвер, п'ятниця, субота та неділя. Now, what did I do? I started with the first day, Monday, понеділок. What does it mean? If to translate, that means day after don't work day. And I will get to неділя, why it's called that. But понеділок means day after don't work day. Вівторок, second day, середа, third, четверг, fourth, п'ятниця, fifth. Subota, I believe that's from the Sabbath, day of rest and worship. And неділя, не до діла, діла не треба. That means do not work day. Now, the interesting thing I've noticed here is that середа in Ukrainian means middle, is not quite in the middle of the week, as you can see by that red frame. Now, one way to explain that would be to say that the week starts with Sunday, and then everything would make sense. As I've read while preparing for this meeting, that 52% of calendars in the world mark Sunday as the first day of the week. The problem with that approach is that Vivtorak, i.e. Tuesday, is named Vivtorak, means the second day of the week, thus making Ponedilok the first one, and not allowing for Sunday to be the first day of the week. So it's a puzzle. I do not have an answer to that. I just brought out an interesting observation, and also pointed out the origins of the days of the week names. And next slide, please. And finally, I want to delve a little bit into Ukrainian poetry. Taras Shevchenko is great. Lesya Ukrainka is great. There are many other Ukrainian poets who are great. I like them all. I do like Leonid Glebov and his fables. His translation of Aesop's tales are in all respect just as good or better as Russian translations made by Krylov. But there's one called The Wolf and the Lamb, and all of you may have read it in English, but in Ukrainian it starts as follows. На світі вже давно ведеться, що нижчий перед вищим гнеться, а більше меншого кусає та ще й б'є. За тим, що сила є. And what that translate is, the way that translate is basically that it's always been like this in the world, that the lower one bends in front of the taller one, and the bigger one bites and kicks the smaller one, and that's all because he can. Now, and the interesting observation here I would like to make is that in as far as what we're observing happening now in my motherland, in Ukraine, the second part of this verse is true. The bigger one does indeed try to kick the smaller one just because he can. But the first part of this fable is not quite true. That the smaller one bends in front of the taller one. Ukraine is standing firm, and I thank you, and I appreciate all of y'all's support of Ukraine. Thank you, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much, Sergey, for your presentation. I'll stop sharing now. Are there any questions? Right, so Derek, just one moment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for making it happening with the slides. I mean, I was at a loss. You know, you saved me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey, for your wonderful presentation and all the great work that your foundation is doing. And I noticed that the foundation is supporting STEM students, and that's fantastic, and it's great to have a focus like that. But what you also did in the second part of your presentation was show the wonderful connections that can be made through exploring language from the point of view of the arts, poetry, looking at the names of the months and so on. So I wondered if your foundation does any work in that regard, whether through the STEM students or some other way in which you spread knowledge and understanding of Ukraine through literature and poetry.
Not yet, because we have started only 3 months ago, and we are focused on STEM. But I agree with you; those two are interconnected. The issue now is to get as many talented Ukrainian, or the task number one right now is to get as many talented STEM Ukrainians into reputable US and UK universities as possible. So, and also to add to that, I'm in a way a one-man show. I'm currently the only person working at the fund. Therefore, I do everything, and I physically am unable to do anything but focus in on trying to get these few dozen Ukrainian students that we're currently supporting with the application process, with getting them into good universities. However, once that is done, and hopefully once that is done well, we can definitely look into other things. And when I say we can look, I am I definitely have a voice in what's happening, but there's advisory board, and the advisory board makes the decision. So I can make recommendations, but at the end, it's a collegial decision. But to summarize, I agree with you that it'd be good if we could do more.
Okay, thank you very much. And now a question from James Douglas.
Yes, thank you, Sergey. Very interesting talk. I just wondered if you could tell us why the months in Ukrainian are so different from that in many other European languages. Now, I'm not a great linguist, but I know the months in Russian are a bit more like Western months. And I just wonder, is this an idiosyncrasy? Is this a special feature of Ukrainian? Or are there other countries which got such a practical term for all their months?
That's a very good question. I can only speculate. Again, I'm not a linguist, and when I say I'm not a linguist, I'm a lawyer, first and foremost. I mean, a lawyer by trade, and that's my first calling. So every lawyer, to some degree, is a linguist. Look, I mean, the explanation goes, at some point, Russia had adopted the Latin names and spelling of the months. So all of the Russian languages months originate not with Russia, but with Latin months. And just like we have here, same names, slightly changed, adopted to Russian pronunciation. Now, Ukraine, Poland, and Belarus have stayed with these months, and now I'm making a next step, which is not necessarily supported by evidence. I'm just speculating. I think it's because these are the original names, Old Slavic names, and please note that Russia had always had that weird fascination yet hate towards the West, where on the one hand there's a lot of hatred, but on the other hand there's a lot of fascination and desire to implement what Russians feel is good in the West, or for that matter, trans. So at some point, I believe Tsarist Russia decided to implement those names, the Latin names for the months, but Ukrainians, Ukrainian language, Belarusian language, or Belarus language, and Polish languages still have kept these what I believe are Old Slavic names.
Thank you very much. That's interesting.
Are there any more questions? Well, actually, to follow on from Sergey's point that about the similarities between the months in Polish and Ukrainian, for my limited knowledge of Ukrainian, I do recognize that there are many sort of similarities between Polish and Ukrainian. So a lot of when I say that, I mean in the words that Poles and Ukrainians will use. So which actually makes it very interesting. On the other, there were also many sort of similarities to Russian as well, but one should definitely not think that Ukrainian is just the same as Russian. Definitely not. There are many similarities to Polish, as well, and so. So, are there any more questions? Any more thoughts? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Two questions. First, well, ladies first.
I'll be brief because for me it's not a question, it's a comment. So I'm from Zimbabwe and the native language there is Ndebele. And we also actually name the months according to what is happening. For example, April is Mabasa, because that's when it's after harvesting and you have the plants dry and you burn them up or whatever to prepare the land for the next season. Why this was interesting for me is that what I notice now in my home country is that the seasons seem to have shifted forward. So what we used to do in April in the past, we now do in May. The rains that used to arrive in October now arrive in November. And I was curious if you are seeing similar trends as well.
It's hard for me to answer that one because over the last 10 years, I've lived in truly a dozen countries, thus, and I'm not, as a lawyer, I would respond like this. I'm not qualified as an expert to provide a opinion on that. But what I can say is that I've watched plenty of videos about Zimbabwe, and I can definitely comment on the beauty of your country. It's wonderful. It's marvelous. I've seen the trees blossom in the spring, those purple trees. I don't know what they're called, but it's just it's a beautiful place.
Yes.
I understand from our Ukrainian guests in the UK that the Ukrainian government have stopped adult students from leaving the country. If that is so, do you know if they're enforcing it at the moment?
Well, that's a very good question, and I definitely do not want to get into politics, and definitely do not want to get into commenting on something I have a very weak grasp of. What I do know is that here's what I do know: that when we communicate to Ukrainian students, STEM students, we would like to help with education. We do inform them in our emails saying that if you are over 18 and in Ukraine and a male who is not a protected status male, like a handicapped person or something else, that they would let them. Basically, we're saying if you're a male over 18 and in Ukraine, our ability to help you in any way as far as leaving the country and go study abroad is severely limited. In other words, I believe it's fully true. I believe they can call it, I mean, I don't know on which level that regulation is, but as a practical matter, Ukrainian males, 99% of Ukrainian males over the age of 18 who are in Ukraine cannot leave Ukraine.
Are there any final questions or comments? Okay, well, in that case, thank you again, Sergey, and
thank you, Tim. I appreciate your invitation.
And I'd like to, first of all, thank all of our speakers, today for providing a very, rich and varied program. And, you've given us, a lot sort of to think about. And I think I will be sending out a feedback form to get your feedback about this event and what could be, you know, what was good, what can be done better in the future, and ideas for the future. I think I'll need some time to watch the recordings to let all the information, as we say in English, sink in several times. But apart from all the speakers who have given up their time today, I'd like to thank all the audience and all the people who participated during the conference, both online and here in Lancaster. Thank you very much, you know, for coming. And because it's a LUkrainian conference, I'll finish in Ukrainian. Дуже дякую вам, було чудово, попросту. Дуже дякую, що ви вирішили поділитися своїми досвідами. Мені дуже сподобалося вас слухати. І я, як я тільки що сказав, я вам надішлю форм, бланк, і щоб отримати ваші коментарі. І ну, сподіваюсь, що вам так сподобалось, як мені. І бувайте, тримайтеся. І якщо ви вивчаєте українську мову, бажаю вам багато успіхів. So thank you very much for everything. And I will stop the recording now. So зараз я закінчу записи. Okay.